The night wind carried the scent of pine and coal dust across the wide frontier, moving like a restless spirit through the canyons and the open plains. Under that silver sky, a young woman named Lyria ran with every ounce of strength left in her trembling legs. Her boots kicked up thin clouds of dirt as she crossed the silent stretch of land, clutching the strap of her worn satchel close to her chest. The prairie moon shone pale light on her fair hair, making it glow like a ribbon against the dark world that swallowed everything around her. She did not dare look back. She already knew who followed. The fierce Apache chief known as Kellen had once walked beside her as if the world itself bowed to his footsteps. The first time she saw him, standing tall with his wolf cloak and unshaken eyes, her heart had felt as if the earth beneath her boots shifted. There had been a pull she could not name, something wild and deep that wrapped around her spirit before she knew it. Yet now that same powerful force chased her across the frontier, and she no longer knew whether she was running from danger or from the way he had awakened something inside her she was too afraid to face. The old American frontier had a way of shaping a soul. It sharpened some people, and it softened others. Lyria had lived long enough on this hard land to know that a person's fate could change in a single moment. One choice, one breath, one meeting, and her life had changed the day she crossed paths with Kellen, the warrior whose presence felt like a storm roaring over the mountains. She had gone to trade for supplies near the border where the tall pines met the open prairie fields. She had expected a simple day, nothing more. Instead, she had witnessed a wounded Apache youth collapse in front of her wagon. Without thinking, she had helped him, tearing her skirt for bandages, offering water from her own flask. She had not known the boy was the nephew of the Apache chief himself. She had not known that her kindness would reach the ears of a man who commanded both fear and respect among his people. She had not known that from the moment Kellen stepped into her life, he would refuse to step out again. Lyria remembered the first time he stood before her. His tall frame blocked out the rising sun as he approached her camp. His dark hair moved with the wind, his face carved with the strength and stillness of a man shaped by many battles and endless loyalty. He had thanked her in a voice that felt like thunder wrapped in warmth. She had tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Something in his gaze had pinned her in place, not with fear, but with a strange pull that made her feel both steady and unsteady at once. Kellen had returned the next day, and the day after that. He brought her herbs for trading, pelts for her wagon, and once even a wolf pup that had lost its mother. The more she spoke to him, the more she understood the layers beneath his warrior exterior. He was fierce, yes, but he was also gentle in ways she did not expect. He listened. He noticed things others ignored. He carried the burdens of his people with unwavering strength. And when he looked at her, it was as if he saw past every wall she had ever built. Lyria had not meant to feel anything for him. She had spent years guarding her heart after losing her family to sickness during one bitter winter. She had promised herself she would never want anything she could not keep, never trust her future to someone bound to a different world. But Kellen had a way of reaching places she had locked away. She found herself watching for him at dusk. She found herself thinking of him when she lit her lantern. She found herself smiling at the smallest memory of his steady voice, or the way he carried himself against the backdrop of the tall cedar trees. Feelings grew in silence, and she was too slow to stop them. Still, the frontier was a place where peace lasted only as long as the next breath. Rumors spread of conflicts rising again, of raids and misunderstandings, settlers crossing boundaries and warriors preparing for defense. A bond between a frontier woman and an Apache chief could bring storms none of them could survive. Lyria understood the danger long before she accepted it. And Kellen, despite his strength, could not change the tide of tension spreading across the land. The day she fled had not been born from fear of him. It had been born from fear of what the world would do to them if she stayed. She had overheard a group of settlers planning to confront the Apache camp, blaming them for a missing wagon that had nothing to do with Kellen's people. Lyria knew their accusations were false. She knew the settlers' anger was fueled by fear rather than truth. And she knew that if she remained anywhere near Kellen, suspicion would turn toward her. She would become the bridge between two sides already at risk of tearing apart. If trouble erupted, she would be the spark both sides blamed, so she left at dawn. Alone and silent, taking only what fit inside her satchel. She hoped distance would break whatever bond had formed between them. She hoped he would forget the way she smiled when the wind caught the edge of his cloak. She hoped the feelings in her own heart would fade once she was far enough away. But Kellen was not a man who let fate steal something he cared for. As Lyria ran through the moonlit prairie, she heard the distant thrum of hooves against the earth. Her breath caught. She recognized that sound. She had heard it before when Kellen and his warriors returned from long journeys. It was the sound of determination. The sound of a promise carried on the wind. She felt her pulse quicken as fear and something else rose inside her. She stumbled near the edge of a dry creek bed, steadying herself before climbing down the rocky slope. Her lantern swung at her side, casting trembling shadows across the jagged stones. She crouched behind a cluster of sagebrush, trying to slow her breathing. She listened to the night, waiting for silence or danger. Instead, she heard the low, steady howl of a wolf in the distance. It traveled through the canyon like a call meant for her alone. Her chest tightened. Kellen often traveled with a loyal wolf he had raised since it was a cub. The sound meant he was closer than she wanted to admit. Lyria pressed a hand over her mouth, fighting the trembling that ran down her spine. She had convinced herself she was doing the right thing by leaving. She told herself she was protecting both him and herself. Yet now, hiding beneath the wide sky with nothing but her pounding heart for company, she felt the truth settle heavy inside her. She was not just running from danger. She was running from the man who had stirred something she no longer knew how to face. The hoofbeats grew louder. The wolf howled again, closer this time, and Lyria knew the moment she feared had arrived. Though she did not yet know whether it would save her or ruin her, Kellen would chase her to his last breath. And as the night tightened around her, she understood one thing with painful clarity. She was no longer certain. She wanted him to stop. The cold night pressed against Lyria's skin as she knelt beneath the shelter of the sagebrush, her breath rising in small, trembling clouds. The stillness around her felt thin, stretched tight over the land like a drum ready to break. She listened to the echo of hoofbeats rolling across the plains, each one steady, unhurried, almost certain. It was the pace of a man who knew he would not lose what he was chasing. The frontier was wide, but it was not wider than Kellen's resolve. She tried to steady her breath, tried to remind herself why she had left. But her thoughts tangled the way dry weeds, not around fence wire. The world had not always felt like a place where she had to run. Before Kellen, before the fear of rising conflict, she had lived a quiet life on the edge of a small settlement near the tall buffalo grass. The winters were harsh, the summers long, but it was a place where she knew every voice, every path, every sound the wind carried. Her father had been a traveler who believed the frontier shaped a person differently than the cities to the east. He had taught Lyria how to ride before she could reach the saddle alone, how to gather wild herbs, how to track animals without startling them. When he and her mother fell ill during a snow season, she took care of them until the very end, burying them on a hill that overlooked the plains they loved. After that, she survived by trading handmade goods, mending old coats, and helping travelers who passed through. Some called her too gentle to live alone in a world of storms and grit. But they did not know how loss could teach a person to grow strong in silence. She had never expected her quiet path to cross into the life of the Apache, much less into the life of their fierce chief. Yet fate had a way of brushing two worlds together until sparks formed where no one expected them. The first time Kellen's nephew had fallen near her camp, she had not hesitated for a moment. The boy had been feverish and pale, his breath ragged. She remembered lifting him with her own hands, guiding him into the shade, covering him with her coat. She had sung a tune her mother once used to calm storms inside the heart. Even then, she had not thought of what might follow. She acted because she could not do otherwise. When Kellen arrived 2 days later, Lyria had not known his face, but every instinct told her he was a man molded by battle and loyalty. His eyes were fierce yet steady, watching her with a mix she could not read. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was strength beneath it, a strength that filled the air like a warm fire on a winter night. She learned later that he was a leader who carried the weight of his people on his shoulders. She learned he had lost brothers, friends, and land to broken promises made by settlers who feared what they did not understand. Even so, he had not turned bitter. He led with a fierce sense of protection, with loyalty so deep it could move mountains. Lyria had not meant to lean toward that warmth. She had not meant to smile when he returned the next day with dried herbs to thank her. She had not meant to ask about the wolf pup trailing behind him. But the world softened when he was near. It softened in ways that scared her, in ways that made her feel alive for the first time in years. Yet even then, shadows moved through the frontier. Settlers whispered about land disputes, claiming the Apache were restless. The Apache whispered about broken treaties, claiming the settlers were pushing deeper than they should. Tension grew like wildfire under dry brush. Lyria began to feel caught between two sides, neither willing to listen. The more she grew close to Kellen, the more she realized that her presence might bring danger to both. The trouble began the night she overheard 3 men from the settlement gathered around a dying fire, their voices lowered. They were angry about a missing wagon that had been pulled off the trail by thieves. They blamed the Apache without proof. One of the men swore he would bring a group to search the forest where Kellen's people lived. Lyria knew their plan would lead to trouble. If they rode in with suspicion and rifles, lives could be lost on both sides. Fear settled deep inside her. She knew Kellen would not harm people without reason, but she also knew he would defend his people fiercely if threatened. The land had seen enough blood. She would not let her presence be the spark that lit another blaze. So she left before sunrise, telling no one, hoping distance would quiet the storm gathering around her heart. She did not know then that Kellen would follow. She did not know that he would refuse to let the bond between them dissolve into the prairie wind. Now, crouched near the creek bed with the cold settling into her bones, she heard the hoofbeats drawing closer. She tried to convince herself she was prepared, that she could speak calmly if Kellen caught her, that she would tell him she left for the good of both sides. But her pulse knew the truth. She was not ready to face the man whose gaze could unravel all her careful plans. A rustle from the ridge made her lift her head. She saw a dark silhouette move along the horizon, half hidden by the bending grass. The wolf howled again, not in warning but in recognition. Her fingertips pressed into the earth as if anchoring herself against a storm. Kellen's voice broke the silence. He called her name once. Only once. It echoed across the creek bed with a weight that made her close her eyes. There was no anger in it, only a quiet certainty that cut through the night like an arrow. She stayed crouched, heart pounding. Maybe he would ride past. Maybe he would think the wind had carried her far ahead. But deep down she knew he would not. Kellen was not a man who searched with half his heart. If he was here, he would not leave without seeing her. The sound of his horse slowed. Hooves stepped onto the rocky ground above her hiding place. She could hear the soft snort of the animal, feel the vibration of its movement through the earth. She kept her breath shallow, hoping the shadows would hide her. But when she peeked, upward she saw the outline of a man dismounting, his long cloak shifting with the wind. Kellen stepped forward, scanning the creek bed with the sharp instinct of a hunter who knew the land like his own pulse. His posture was calm, though the tension around his shoulders showed he had been riding hard. His hair flowed behind him, dark against the pale sky. He moved with a confidence that made her chest tighten. Lyria's thoughts tangled. She wanted to call his name. She wanted to stay hidden. She wanted to run. Her heart pulled in 2 directions, tearing her in ways she had never known before. Kellen paused near the edge of the slope. The wolf circled beside him, nose lifted toward the wind. Lyria lowered her head, hoping the sagebrush would mask her scent. But the animal let out a low rumble, not threatening but alert. Kellen's voice dropped to a quiet tone, one filled with sadness more than anger. He said he knew she was near, said he had followed her trail across miles of land because he could not understand why she had vanished without a word. He said she had taken something with her when she left, something he could not allow the wind to claim. Lyria pressed her hand against the dirt as his words drifted down the slope. Her chest tightened. She had tried to protect him by leaving. She had tried to protect herself from the storm inside her heart. Yet here he was, standing above her, refusing to let distance settle between them. The wolf took another step forward. Kellen followed. And, as he moved closer to the edge of the creek bed, Lyria felt the night tighten around her with the certainty that whatever happened next would change everything. Kellen stood at the edge of the slope, and the night seemed to lean in with him. The wolf's ears twitched as it caught Lyria's scent. Lyria knew there was no more hiding. The land itself had given her away. She rose slowly from behind the sagebrush, hands open at her sides so he would see she carried no weapon. Dirt-streaked. Her skirt and the wind had tangled her hair, but her eyes were clear when she lifted them to meet his. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The creek bed lay between them like a shallow canyon, carved by choices neither could undo. "You should not have followed me," she said at last, her voice thin from running and from the weight of what she had done. "I could say the same," Kellen answered. "Should not have left." His tone was calm, but she heard the strain hiding under it. This was the Apache chief people called Relentless, the warrior settlers whispered about when the fire burned low. Yet the man standing before her looked less like a legend and more like someone who had carried too much loss to let one more person slip away. Lyria swallowed hard. "If I had stayed, your people would be in more danger than you know. The settlers are restless. They are looking for a reason to ride against you. They will use anything they can." Kellen stepped down the slope with measured steps, stopping when he stood a few paces from her. The wolf came to his side, eyes reflecting the pale light. He studied her face, as if reading truths she was not ready to speak. "You think you protect us by running from us," he said. "You think distance will turn their hate away? It will not. They already fear what they do not understand." Lowered her gaze, feeling the sting of his words because they carried the same fear that had chased her through the night. She had spent days listening to talk in the settlement. Men at the trading post swore the Apache stole horses. Women at the well repeated stories they had never seen with their own eyes. The missing wagon had given them a reason to gather rifles in anger. "They plan to enter your forest," she said. "They are certain your camp lies behind the tall cedars. If they find you ready for war, there will be blood. If they find you unprepared, there will be more." Kellen's jaw tightened. For a moment she saw the chief, rather than the man who had once handed her herbal roots with a quiet smile. She knew he could not ignore such a threat. The safety of his people sat above his own desires. "My scouts have seen them near the ridge," he said. "We know they move closer each day, but I did not ride into the night for them. I rode for you." The confession caught her off guard. The words settled between them with a weight that made it hard to breathe. She wanted to pretend it was only loyalty, only gratitude for saving his nephew, nothing more. Yet the way his voice softened when he spoke made that lie crumble. "You should be with your people," she said quietly. "Not chasing a foolish woman who thinks she can outrun trouble." "You are not foolish," he replied. "You are brave and afraid at the same time." "So am I." The simplicity of his answer shook her more than any grand speech. It reminded her that beneath his title, beneath the feathers and leather and scars, there lived a man who woke each morning wondering how to keep his people alive on a land that kept shrinking around them, far from the creek bed. In the settlement where lanterns glowed behind shutters, a different conflict brewed. Caleb Holt, a cattle rancher with weathered skin and sharp eyes, sat at a rough wooden table with two other men. One was a trader named Briggs, whose fear of the Apache had hardened into hatred. The third was a young farmhand named Jory, who listened more than he spoke. Briggs slammed his fist onto the table. "We let that Apache chief grow stronger, we will regret it. I heard he has warriors hiding in the hills, waiting for a chance to strike. I say we ride first." Caleb took a slow breath, staring into his tin cup. "You also say they stole the wagon. Yet we found tracks of 3 horses with shoes cut wrong. Apache do not shoe their horses like that. Tell me why your story does not match the ground we walk on." Briggs scowled. "Tracks can lie. Those people are thieves. They look at our land and see what they want." Jory shifted in his seat. "I went near the cedar line last week. Saw smoke rising. Heard singing. Did not sound like a war camp. Sounded like families trying to live." Briggs shot him a glare. You getting soft, boy? Those families raise warriors. Caleb's gaze drifted toward the dark window, where the wide prairie lay under starlight. He had lost a brother in an old skirmish, but he had also watched a wounded Apache woman tend her enemy's horse because the animal had done nothing wrong. The frontier blurred the lines between friend and foe. He did not know how to keep his ranch safe without turning into the kind of man he despised. If we ride in with rifles, Caleb said, we might get the fight you are so eager for. But when the smoke clears, what then? More graves, more widows, more children who learn to hate? Briggs leaned forward, eyes cold. Or we teach them fear so they never come near our herds again. The argument hung heavy in the room. Jory thought of Lyria, the quiet woman who had once mended his torn jacket without asking payment. She had been missing 3 days. Some said she left to visit a cousin. Others said she was taken by raiders. Jory did not believe either story. He had seen the way she looked toward the line of trees at dusk, like someone waiting for a shadow that did not belong to this side of the prairie. Back at the creek bed, Lyria and Kellen moved along the rocks, putting a little distance between themselves and the open slope in case anyone else was near. The wolf padded ahead, nose close to the ground. The sky had begun to pale at the edges, a sign that dawn would soon wash the darkness away. You should come with me to speak to Caleb Holt, Lyria said, surprising herself as the idea formed. He is stubborn, but not blind. If you both talk without rifles between you, maybe there is a chance to calm the others. Kellen studied her carefully. You ask me to ride into the heart of a settlement that distrusts my people after they already gather weapons? I ask you to meet one man, she said, a rancher whose voice carries weight. If he turns his mind against a raid, others will follow. I know the risk. I also know I cannot stand on 2 sides of a river forever. Sooner or later, the water will rise. He looked away, watching the faint line of light grow along the horizon. She could see the battle taking place behind his steady eyes. Duty to his people on one side, the fragile trust he had placed in her on the other. The Apache chief inside him measured danger. The man inside him measured loss. If I ride into their town, he said slowly, my warriors will worry. Some already question why I visit the trading path so often. They say, I bring danger closer by walking beside you. The mention of his people reminded Lyria of another angle she had not yet considered. How did his tribe see her? As a friend? A threat? A stranger who might lead more settlers to their door? Do they hate me? She asked. Hate is a word used by those who refuse to look beyond fear, Kellen answered. Some distrust you. Others remember, you saved my nephew. One elder woman says, you have a spirit like the hawk, small but watching everything. She does not trust many, yet she says you carry truth in your eyes. The thought of an unseen elder weighing her spirit made Lyria's chest warm and uneasy at once. The mystery of a camp she had never visited, of families who spoke in a rhythm different from her own, deepened the divide she felt. She belonged to neither world fully now. The frontier had stretched her heart across a distance she did not know how to cross. Would your council allow peace talks with the settlers? She asked. Kellen sighed, a rare sound from him. Some would. Some have lost too much to believe in words. They carry memories of broken treaties like stones in their pockets. When they hear the word peace, they taste ash. They walked along the creek until they reached a stand of cottonwood trees. Kellen tied his horse there, while Lyria sat on a fallen log, rubbing at a bruise on her ankle she had earned while running in the dark. The wolf lay nearby, watchful but calm. What I feel for you, Kellen said quietly, does not change the war building around us. Yet those feelings are real. I cannot throw them away as if they are leaves on the wind. She lowered her hands, heart pounding again. Hearing him speak so plainly shook the careful distance she had tried to build. His confession did not sound like the words of a romantic tale. They sounded like the simple, heavy truth of a man who had seen death and still chose to risk more pain. I care for you too, she admitted. That is why I left. I thought if I pulled myself away, the settlers would stop watching you with suspicion. I thought if I disappeared, they would lose interest in your camp. Instead, you gave them another story, he said. A woman vanishing without word makes fearful minds whisper. They will blame us even sooner. The realization cut through her like a blade. Her choice, meant to protect, had likely fed more rumors than if she had stayed. In trying to outrun danger, she had circled back into its path. Another voice spoke from the shadows then, startling them both. A young Apache warrior stepped from behind a tree, bow in hand, eyes sharp. His name was Talon, a scout who often rode ahead of Kellen's group. Lyria had seen him once at a distance, but never this close. "Chief?" Talon said, nodding with respect, though his gaze flickered briefly toward Lyria with guarded curiosity. "I followed your trail when you left camp so fast. I feared trouble. Our scouts bring news. Settlers gather near the ridge. More than before? They speak of riding at dawn." Kellen's posture straightened. The calm in his eyes changed to a focused edge. "How many?" "Enough to make the ground shake," Talon replied. "They carry torches and rifles. Some women weep at the doorways. Others pack wagons. They prepare for more than a simple ride. They prepare for a move they cannot undo." Lyria felt the air leave her lungs. The raid she had feared was no longer rumor. It was a storm forming on the horizon, its first winds already stirring dust. Kellen looked at her. Then back at Talon. The wolf rose to its feet, as if sensing the shift in the air. "Tell the camp to prepare," Kellen said. "Defend the young and the old. Move them deeper into the forest. No one strikes first. But if the settlers bring fire, we will not lie down in it." Talon nodded and disappeared into the trees with the silent speed of a shadow. Lyria stood, every muscle tight. "Let me go to Caleb Holt," she said. "If I can reach him before they ride, he might call some of them back. At least enough to slow the fire." Kellen studied her, torn between the need to protect her and the need to use every fragile chance for peace. She saw the conflict in his eyes. Trusting her now meant placing the fate of his people partly in the hands of a woman caught. Between worlds, the eastern sky glowed brighter. Dawn was coming fast. Two paths stretched before them, both leading into danger, both tied to the rising storm between settlers and Apache. Kellen stepped closer. So near she could feel the warmth of him against the cold air. His hand brushed the side of her arm, a simple touch that carried more weight than any promise. "If I let you go," he said, "you walk into a town that already whispers my name with fear. If I keep you with me, you may be safer, but we lose the chance you carry. Either way, the frontier decides what kind of story we leave behind." The wolf gave a soft growl. Eyes turned toward the distant ridge where smoke already hinted at early campfires. The land held its breath as the Apache chief and the frontier woman stood caught between love and duty, peace and war. Each step they might take heavy enough to change the future of everyone on both sides of the prairie. The first firelit glow of dawn stretched thin across the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pale gold and dusty red. Lyria stood with her heart racing as Kellen weighed the decision before them, the moment shaking the air like a drum about to burst. His people were in danger. Her settlement was spiraling toward a raid. In between both worlds stood the fragile thread of trust she and Kellen had built, with quiet glances and unspoken truths. Kellen's hand lingered on her arm a moment longer before he drew back. "If you go," he said, voice steady but rough, "you must not ride alone. The forest is crawling with fear this morning. Fear has itchy fingers and fast triggers." "I can move faster without company," she answered. "They will listen to me if I arrive alone. Not if I come with an Apache warrior guarding my back." The wolf brushed against Kellen's leg, restless, sensing the change. Talon's warning still hung heavy in the early air. Settlers gathering. Rifles gleaming, torches waiting. The cedar ridge would soon become a line between life and death. Kellen's gaze locked on her with a mixture of pride and worry. "If anything happens to you on their land, I cannot reach you fast enough." She looked up at him, fear and determination twisting together in her chest. "And if anything happens to your people, it will be because I stayed silent. Let me do this." Trust me the way you ask your counsel to trust your choices." The struggle behind his eyes softened, replaced by something deeper. He finally nodded. "Go to Caleb Holt. Tell him the truth. Tell him the wagon thieves rode north, not into our land. Tell him raiding the Apache will only bring more grief. He is stubborn, but he listens to reason if it comes from a voice he respects. I only hope he still respects mine." "You carry the kind of honesty men notice," Kellen said. "They may not always like it, but they hear it." Lyria mounted her horse, tightening the strap. Kellen reached up and placed his hand along the reins, pausing her. The rising sun caught the edges of his face, casting half of him in warm light and half in shadow. "Lyria," he said quietly, "come back to me." Her breath caught, but she only nodded, afraid her voice would reveal too much. Then she turned her horse toward the settlement, guiding the animal across the uneven ground as the wind swept her hair back. She did not look over her shoulder until she reached the edge of the trees. Kellen still stood there, tall and unmoving, the wolf by his side, watching her ride away as if placing his heart in her hands. The moment she disappeared into the brush, the tension in her chest grew sharper. The forest felt heavier than usual, thick with the weight of both fear and hope. Every rustle of branches made her grip the reins tighter. Every shift of light made her imagine riders waiting to confront her. Yet she pushed forward, urging her horse through the narrow trail she knew by memory. The path wound along the side of the ridge, past a fallen tree she had once used for gathering mushrooms, past a clearing where she had met Kellen's nephew for the second time. Every memory felt like a thread pulling her back to him, reminding her that danger was no longer just a distant fear but a fire already lit. As she neared the settlement, the distant sounds of movement reached her ears. Voices, horses, the unmistakable clatter of metal. Her pulse quickened. She guided her horse to a slower trot, approaching the edge of the settlement with caution. Smoke rose from chimneys and from torches planted in the dirt. Men gathered near Caleb Holt's barn, their faces drawn tight with tension. Some rolled barrels toward wagons, while others checked the straps of their rifles. Fear hung in the air like a fog. Jory was the first to see her. He hurried forward, waving his arms. "Lyria, by the stars, where have you been? Everyone said you were gone for good." "I need Caleb," she said breathlessly. "Right now." Jory's eyes widened. "He's inside the barn." "The men are planning a ride, I know." She slid off her horse before it fully stopped. "I have to speak to him before they leave." Jory hesitated only a second before nodding and leading her toward the barn. Inside, Caleb stood at a table covered in maps and lanterns. Briggs was beside him, face twisted with determination. The moment Lyria stepped inside, Briggs stiffened. "You," he said sharply. "We heard you ran off into the woods. Thought maybe the Apache carried you off." "I left on my own," Lyria said firmly, her voice steady despite the knot of nerves in her stomach. "And I came back because you're about to make a mistake no one can take back." Caleb looked at her with relief mixed with surprise. "Lyria, what happened?" "Where have you been?" She held his gaze. "I've been near the Cedar Ridge, and I found the tracks of the stolen wagon. They were not Apache. The horses wore odd shoes, uneven and sharp. The same kind used by the bandits who rode north last month." Briggs snorted. "You expect us to believe you over witness accounts?" Lyria stepped closer, refusing to back down. "You have no witness, only guesses and fear. The Apache do not want war. They want safety. If you charge into their camp with guns, you will bring war where none existed." Caleb frowned at the map. "You're sure about the tracks?" "Yes," she said, "and your men know it if they stop to think. Apache horses leave soft prints. These were heavy, sharp, uneven. I followed them far enough to know they had nothing to do with Kellen's people." Briggs's expression twisted. "Kellen? So you did meet him?" "Just as we suspected." Jory stepped forward. "That does not make her a liar. She's telling the truth. I saw the wagon marks near the ridge myself. I didn't say anything because you all were too fired up to listen." Briggs pointed a finger at Jory. "You watch your tongue, boy." "Or what?" Jory replied. "You will blame me for something you cannot prove." Caleb raised a hand, silencing them. His eyes never left Lyria. If you're right, then raiding them will only stir more trouble. Yes, she said. They have children. They have elders. They will defend themselves if attacked, but they will not start the fight. Briggs slammed his fist against the table. Of course she defends them. She's been spending time with their chief. The room fell silent. Lyria felt every eye turn toward her. She took a slow breath. I don't owe you explanations about my life, but I will tell you this. Kellen is not the monster you claim. He leads because he must, and he is willing to speak to you if you call off this raid. Caleb stared at her, the flicker of the lantern reflecting in his tired eyes. He wanted peace. She could see that. But fear was a strong wind on the frontier. It pushed men into choices they swore they would never make. Before he could speak, a loud cry cut through the settlement. A horse galloped toward the barn, its rider breathless. Ridge Trail, the man gasped. Men gathering near the trees. Looks like they are splitting. Some heading north. Some west. Caleb tensed. How many? Dozens. Briggs grabbed his rifle with triumph. You see? They're mobilizing. Lyria shook her head. They're moving their families. They're preparing to protect their young. But Briggs wasn't listening. He stormed toward the door, shouting for the others to gather. Caleb hesitated. His jaw clenched. His hand lifted, then lowered. He was struggling between fear and reason. Between Briggs's yelling and Lyria's warning, Lyria stepped closer. Caleb, if you lead them into the forest now, you may start a battle neither side survives. Please, let me speak to Kellen first. Meet him on open ground. No rifles. Just words. Caleb's breath shook. If I send men home now, they'll call me weak. If you lead men into a pointless fight, the land will call you something far worse, she whispered. It will remember you as the one who lit a fire that burned mothers and children. His eyes softened with pain. He knew she was right. He also knew the cost of stopping a mob already set in motion. Briggs's voice still echoed outside. Saddle up. We ride now. Caleb looked torn in two. Outside, horses were neighing. Men were pulling on coats and belts. The smell of torch oil drifted through the air. Lyria felt time slipping through her, fingers like sand. Kellen waited for her return. His people waited for safety, and she was standing in the middle of the powder trail, staring at a spark about to fall. Caleb, she said softly, her voice tight, if you don't stop them now, the ground between the settlement and the Apache will run red before noon. Caleb closed his eyes, and the next moment would decide everything. Hanging between the whisper of dawn and the roar of war, Caleb opened his eyes slowly, and in them, Lyria saw the exhaustion of a man caught between duty and fear. Outside, men shouted as they tightened saddles and loaded rifles, ready to ride into a storm no one truly wanted. The air vibrated with tension, and she could almost feel the sharp edge of danger brushing against the skin of everyone in the settlement. For a breath, Caleb simply stood there, breathing heavily. Looking at her with a weight that felt heavier than any decision he had ever made, Lyria, he said quietly, if I stop them, they'll say I protected the Apache instead of my own. She stepped closer, voice steady. You will be protecting your own by stopping them. There is no safety in a fight built on fear and lies. Caleb looked at the maps again, then at the open doorway where Briggs yelled for the men to form lines. The older rancher slammed the barn door open wider and glared inside. Caleb, he barked, you coming or not? These folks need a leader with grit. Caleb's jaw flexed. For a moment, it seemed he might follow the easy path and step outside to join them. But then he looked back at Lyria, and something shifted. A memory passed between them, unspoken but felt. He remembered the days after his brother's death, when anger and grief clouded the world. He remembered how Lyria had spoken gently to him at the well, saying he should not let pain blind him to the truth in front of him. He remembered how her words had helped him choose patience instead of revenge. Now her voice carried the same steady truth. Finally, Caleb straightened his shoulders. Hold them back, he said to Jory. No one leaves the yard. Briggs looked stunned. You can't be serious. They're gathering out there. They're preparing to strike. Caleb stepped out of the barn, raising his hands to the group of men who had begun to form a riding column near the road. They paused, rifles half lifted, waiting for his command. We are not riding out, Caleb called, voice carrying over the cold morning air. Not today, murmurs rose. Briggs pushed forward angrily. You're making a mistake, Caleb. You're letting fear of a woman's story make you weak. Caleb glared at him. The only weakness here is closing your ears to the truth. We have no proof the Apache touched that wagon. We have no reason to start a war. This land has already buried too many. The tension in the yard loosened slightly as the men looked around at one another, unsure. It was one thing to talk about fighting. It was another to ride into an unknown fire without clear reason. Lyria watched them carefully, praying the remaining anger would not flare up again. Briggs shook his head fiercely. Cowards. All of you. He mounted his horse, but before he could spur it forward, Caleb stepped into his path. You ride alone. No one else here will follow a lie. Briggs's fury cracked, spreading through his face like lightning. For a second, Lyria feared he might raise his rifle, but several other men stepped closer to Caleb, forming a silent barrier. Briggs stared at them, then turned his horse sharply and galloped down the dusty road, kicking up dirt behind him. The others looked to Caleb. One by one, they lowered their rifles. The settlement quieted. The danger had not vanished, but the spark had been extinguished. Yria let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Caleb turned to her. Go to him. Tell him his people won't be harmed today. She nodded, grateful, and sprinted to her horse. As she mounted, Caleb called after her, his voice softer. And Lyria, be careful out there. She rode back toward the cedar ridge, guiding her horse swiftly over roots and stone, heart pounding with urgency. She needed to reach Kellen before he prepared for a battle that no longer existed. The forest felt alive with energy, branches swaying, wind rushing past her like a river, urging her forward. As she reached the clearing near the edge of the Apache camp, she saw movement and smoke rising as families packed quickly, preparing to move deeper into safety. When she dismounted, Talon appeared from behind a tree, his bow already in hand. You should not be here, he said. We prepare to defend. Where's Kellen? She asked breathlessly. Talon hesitated, then pointed toward a larger cluster of warriors near the center of the clearing. Lyria hurried past tents and bundles, past women guiding children and men sharpening spears. The closer she got, the louder the tension felt. Almost humming in the air, Kellen stood near a cedar stump, giving final instructions to 3 warriors. When he saw her, his voice faded. He walked toward her immediately, his expression fierce with worry. I feared you would not return. I came as fast as I could, she said. Caleb stopped the men. There will be no raid. No fight today. Kellen studied her face, searching for lies that did not exist. When he saw the truth in her eyes, the tension in his shoulders eased. You convinced him? You convinced him? She said. You showed me the truth. I only carried it back. He stepped closer, the wolf circling behind him. You risked yourself to protect us. You rode into a place where your name is tangled with rumor. Why? Lyria swallowed, feeling the weight of all the miles between them, felt and unseen. Because I couldn't let fear control either side. And because your people deserve peace. And because you asked me to come back? A rare smile touched Kellen's face, small but warm. You returned with more than I expected. Before she could speak, a deep voice approached from behind. It was Elder Mata, the older woman Kellen had once mentioned. Her silver hair was braided, and her gaze was sharp. She looked Lyria up and down, then nodded slowly. So the hawk returns, Mata said, and brings quiet winds with her. Lyria felt her cheeks warm. I only did what I could. Mata looked between her and Kellen with knowing eyes. Sometimes the smallest voices shift mountains. Sometimes the heart guides where reason cannot. Kellen glanced toward Mata with respect, but his gaze quickly returned to Lyria. The danger is not gone, but it has changed shape. The settlers do not ride this morning. That gives us time. Lyria stepped forward. Time for what? Time to build something better, Kellen said. Time to talk instead of strike. Time to show them the truth and not the stories they fear. Caleb will speak with you. He wants to listen now. Kellen looked surprised, then thoughtful. Perhaps the land is tired of silence. Perhaps we all are, she said softly. With the tension broken, preparations in the camp began to slow. Mothers guided their children away from the forest's edge. Warriors eased their grips on rifles and bows. The wolf settled near Lyria's feet, placing its head on its paws, as if sensing the shift. The morning light filtered through the branches, warming the ground beneath them. The sound of fear began to fade, replaced by the quiet hum of hope. It was small, but it grew steadily between the trees. Like new grass pushing through dry earth, Kellen reached out, gently brushing dirt from her sleeve. The touch was simple, but it held every truth they had left unspoken. I feared losing you, he said softly. Not to the settlers or the forest, but to the distance you placed between us. Lyria looked up, her voice steady. I feared wanting a life that the world might fight against. But today showed me something. Peace is possible. Trust is possible. And maybe even a place where both our worlds meet. Kellen's hand hovered near hers, and she met it halfway. Their fingers intertwined. Not with the urgency of fear, but with the quiet certainty of two people who had found something worth holding. The distant ridge no longer felt like a border. It felt like a beginning later that day. Caleb arrived at the open meadow between the settlement and the forest, unarmed, carrying nothing but honesty and a weathered voice ready for truth. Kellen stood with two elders beside him, and Lyria waited between both sides. The meeting was cautious, slow, and filled with long silences, but it held more hope than any moment before. Caleb apologized for the fear his men carried. Kellen explained the true movements of his people. Lyria guided each pause with gentle clarity, bridging the divide inch by inch. By the time the sun began to set, both sides agreed on new boundaries, shared trails, and a promise to speak before raising weapons again. As Caleb rode back to the settlement with a lighter heart, Kellen remained beside Lyria in the warm glow of dusk. The wolf settled at their feet, eyes half closed. Today you gave both our worlds a chance, Kellen said. She smiled softly. We gave it together. He looked toward the horizon, then back at her. Will you walk between us still, or will you walk beside me? The question held more than simple choice. It held a future. Lyria stepped closer, closing the remaining space between them. Beside you, she whispered. Wherever the land leads. Kellen lifted her hand to his chest, over the steady beat of his heart. The forest wind brushed past them softly, carrying the scent of cedar and the promise of new beginnings. In that quiet moment, they stood not as two people from different worlds, but as two souls who had chosen a path shaped by courage, trust, and hope. The frontier stretched wide before them, no longer a place of fear, but a land ready to welcome the peace they fought for. And as the last light of day touched their joined hands, the world finally felt like a place where their story could grow.